Hi students, so today we're talking a little bit about structures in poetry, and we'll add to this list as well, just like our structure, our page of literary devices, as we go forward. So we'll start with the most simple things, right? A line is literally a line of poetry. A stanza is a group of lines in a poem, so this is like a paragraph, what we would call a paragraph in a work of prose. We have a couplet, so these are all different kinds of stanzas or groups. Sometimes they're not actually separated as separate stanzas. Sometimes we know that they're a group based on the rhyming, and we'll talk about rhyming another day. But so a couplet is a group of 2 lines, right? A couple. A quatrain is a group of 4 lines. Simple, right? Quattro, 4. A sestet is a group of 6 lines. And then an octave is a group of 8 lines. These words might be familiar to you if you play music. They're also familiar because they come from Latin, just like Spanish does. So these are sort of kinds of groups of lines that we have in poetry. So the next thing is a structure of poetry that we see a lot, and it's very strictly structured. You can't really deviate from the structure or else it's no longer this kind of poem. So it's a sonnet, so what we call a sonnet. It has 14 lines, no more, no less. And there's 2 types of sonnets usually that we talk about. So we talk about the Italian, also known as the Petrarchan sonnet. Petrarca was an Italian poet. I think he lived in like the 12th or 13th century in Italy. And so these sonnets have 8 lines, 1 octave, followed by 6 lines, a sestet, and that makes 14 lines in total. Then we also have an English or Shakespearean sonnet. It's named after William Shakespeare, very famous, wrote tons of sonnets. And there are 3 quatrains, so that's 3 sets of 4 lines, so that gives us 12. And then it's finished with a couplet, which is 2 lines. So normally a stanza has both rhyme and rhythm, which we also call meter. I know that that's weird and confusing because why would we call it 2 things? But meter and rhythm really are the same thing when we're talking about poetry. And often sonnets are about love, not all of the time, but a lot of the time. And then an English sonnet typically ends with a heroic couplet. It's one of my favorite names for poetic structure. So a heroic couplet, despite its grand name, is really just 2 lines that rhyme. So it's a rhyming couplet, a couplet that rhymes. That's all that a heroic couplet is. But an English sonnet generally ends with a heroic couplet. And then the only other thing that we really need to know if we're talking about sonnets is something called the volta. Volta means to turn. In Spanish, it's vuelta, and it's the shift, right? So this is either a rhetorical shift because a sonnet is often considered to be an argument of some sort. So you make one argument for one part and then you switch and sort of like conclude your argument in some way. It can also be a shift in change or a shift in topic or subject, like what you're talking about might shift a little bit. And sometimes it's really dramatic and it's crystal. Sometimes it's a little bit harder to figure out where the shift comes. And in an Italian sonnet, so there's actually a rule for this. So in the Italian sonnet, generally, not always, but generally, we have, we start with our octave. And then we have the volta, or the shift. And it's invisible, right? We have to just like infer it from our reading. And then we have our sestet. So that's generally what we have with an Italian sonnet. With an English sonnet, usually, not all the time, because poets do not always follow the rules. So with an English sonnet, we typically have our 3 quatrains And I guess we'll call it a shift because we're in English. So then there's a shift. And then we usually end with our heroic couplet, which is usually like a little bit of a summary of the main point of the poem. So just for a little bit further clarification, I'm going to show you what these look like in the Neruda poem that we were reading. So if we look at his poem, we see that we have these 2 quatrains, which would be 8 lines, followed by 2 sets of 6 lines. So my feeling is that this is an Italian sonnet, which makes a lot of sense because Spanish and Italian are so similar. It would make sense that they would follow, that they would use a similar structure for their sonnets. So this would be an Italian sonnet, right? And so here we have 1 line. Here we have a quatrain. I forget what 3 lines is called, but this is the final sestet. And I would expect, so if I were reading this, I would anticipate seeing a shift somewhere, a volta somewhere around here. That's where I would expect to see the shift in the poem. Okay, that's it for now. We'll talk about this plenty in class. And if you have any questions, by all means, let me know. Bye for now.